Start recording now.
Okay.
Did you start? Okay. All right.
Okay.
Let me let me share my screen and give some of my remarks. Okay. What's going on? About to start. Okay. Welcome everybody. I want to add a couple of my own remarks to what Clemente said. Clemente's remarks, unfortunately, were not recorded. He thanked a lot of people who contributed to the conference and gave a brief overview of how we're going to proceed over Zoom. When I was invited to be program chair of the conference of SCN 2020, it was very exciting, and that's immediately what I was thinking about. Right, people are thinking of Amalfi, so this central, beautiful central square, and I was looking forward, looking at this beautiful architecture. So this is one of the things that people look at or think about when they're thinking of Amalfi. Some people are also thinking of the beach. It's very nice, and everybody should go there. Yet some other people are thinking of taking hikes up to the very picturesque mountains. This is Amalfi down there. If you haven't been there, you should check it out. But most people really are thinking about sitting on the stairs of the cathedral, sipping limoncello, people watching, having really great time in the evening. This conference is very nice, and in fact, I also immediately was thinking of bringing my family, and I think everybody in the future should realize that this is a really good place to come with the family. But unfortunately, this year, none of this was happening. So it turns out this year, life is more like the Amalfi musical. And maybe some of you know Amalfi musical, maybe you have seen it. But if you have not seen it, I wanted to briefly talk about it, especially since they made a special edition for SCN conference. Okay, and the story goes like this. So there are scientists, and they want to gather in Amalfi in the pursuit of knowledge. Okay, and it's a brief story, so it's not going to take too long. So they gather in Amalfi in the pursuit of knowledge. Additionally, they come with their students, and students also love to gather in Amalfi in the pursuit of knowledge. But unfortunately, terrible things happen, and we have to do something about it. Well, first, we are in disbelief. We cannot imagine that such horrible things have happened, and we are not able to attend the conference. But as time goes by, the bad news settles in, and we believe it, and we become a little bit more desperate and sad. So that's the next stage of how we deal with it. And then we rebel and we start fighting it. And we fight it. And in the end, we hope and we plan that it's all going to be over. And we're going to meet in the next iteration. We're going to meet next year. Okay, so this is a very simplified version of the musical. But I think that this is sufficient for you to be encouraged to see it in person. A couple of things in addition to what Clemente was talking about. I of course have to thank Clemente, who was fantastic. He organized everything, and as you can imagine, there was a lot of difficulties. And we at some point we planned to have an in-person meeting up to maybe mid-July. We were hoping that at least Europeans will be able to attend, but that didn't happen. And so there was constant shift in plans and adjustments. I think in the end it's gonna it worked out, and it should work out. Fine. Many thanks to the program committee members. Of course, I'm not going to read all of the names. Everybody worked very hard and provided very high quality reviews. I'm continuously impressed, like in previous incarnations of SCN, the review qualities were much better than most of top tier crypto conferences. So that's this year I pushed for that. I made the PC members feel guilty if I felt that that quality of reviews weren't good enough, and I think it was good. There's a lot of people who provided additional reviews for the paper, so these are external reviewers. We of course thank those people, and of course we thank all the authors. This is the most important contributors to the conference. There's a couple of trivial statistics from SCN 2020. There were 88 submitted papers. I think that's quite above a typical year. So I guess people took advantage, took an opportunity, sitting at home and writing papers. I think also the quality of papers was really, really strong this year, and the selection was easy in some sense. Because we didn't, it was, every paper that we accepted was an obvious accept choice, and but it was difficult in some other sense that we had to reject really good papers. We accepted 33 papers, so that's 3/8 accept rate. I didn't calculate it in decimal. And again, I think again the reviewers. I already commented that the reviews were very good, but also I wanted to add that despite the tight deadlines, we extended the submission deadline by, I forget now, 2 weeks or maybe 2 weeks. Even despite of that, we were able to return all reviews in time, in a promised time to the authors. So on this note, I want to conclude my opening remarks, and I guess without interruption we can proceed with the invited talk. So it is our pleasure to have Jesper Nielsen as an invited speaker at SCN. I see that Jesper video appeared, so everything is good. Just a couple of words to Jesper. A couple of words to introduce Jesper. Jesper got his PhD in 2003 from Aarhus University. He worked at ETH Zurich, and he was a visiting researcher at IBM Research New York. And currently, and for a while, he's a professor at Aarhus University. Of course, we know Jesper. He contributed to many areas of cryptography, but his focus was on MPC, the practice and theory of MPC. One of the, in my opinion, one of the very important legacy of that Jesper contributed to is the TP-MPC, the theory and practice of multi-party computation workshop that started. So he was a co-founder of this workshop. The workshop started in I forget which year, 2008, maybe 2010, in Denmark, and it was biennial for a few years, only based in Aarhus, and then it expanded, and many people joined, and there were instances in Bristol and in Israel, and now it's rotating among several locations. So this is one of my favorite venues, the TP-MPC, of all the crypto venues. Jesper, not only academic researcher, he applies his work in practice. He co-founded several companies, and I've heard about them, so I assume they're quite successful. He's a co-founder of the company Partitia, which in 2008 was behind the first industrial application of MPC, and is selling MPC solutions. He's also a co-founder of company Sepior, which is working and selling threshold key management. At Aarhus University, Jesper is the head of the Concordium Blockchain Research Center. And some of the work, this industry work that that Jesper is doing is actually showing up at our SCN conference. Okay, so today I want to give the floor to Jesper. He will talk about MPC in open permissionless blockchains. Thank you, Jesper.
Thank you.
Oh, let me stop sharing.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. Thank you for the very nice introduction. Thank you for inviting me. I'm very happy to be speaking at the SCN, and I do agree with you that in general, I think SCN has a very high quality of reviews, and certainly also this year, not only those accepted, but also the rejected ones, importantly. I'm very happy to be speaking at this venue here. So what I want to talk about today is something we call YOSO. You only speak once. Let's see if that implies to invited talks also. Oh, it snapped out. Why does it do that? I'm on the last slide. Sorry. Okay. So the question I want to ask today is the following. So can you do MPC in a setting with machines which are only allowed to send a single message, and they have to do so at a random time? Okay. I have a little technical problem with my Zoom here. I'm sorry. Okay, like that. So the first question I want to be addressing is why should you do that? And the question is, it's really good at mitigating denial of service attacks. Then I'll show you that we can actually do that. I'll show you an information theoretic solution which have honest majority and guaranteed output delivery. It's not particularly efficient, and if time permits, I'll then show you that we can have a computational secure protocol, which is actually rather practical. But most of my talk will actually go into trying to convince you that you should be looking into YOSO MPC because it's really fun. Okay, I would like more people to join this line of research. So let's first set the stage. So more than a decade ago, the nom de plume Satoshi Nakamoto published the by now well-known Bitcoin protocol. So it works by creating a chain of blocks of transactions. There's a distributed lottery going on, famously implemented by proof of work puzzles. And the winner of the lottery, will be a random peer in the network, which will then win the right to add a block to the chain. And the honest parties are instructed to add a block to the longest chain if there are several chains around. And then if there's honest majority among the winners of the lottery, that will tend to build the longest chain. And in fact, one can prove that the old parts of the chain will tend to be very, very stable. So that establishes consensus in a peer-to-peer network. As of this year, we actually know how to prove that full protocol is secure. There's a really cool paper recently on ePrint. There's a link to it there. Okay, so we can establish consensus in a network like that. So I want to dive a little bit into the lottery, how it works and why it works as it does. So in Bitcoin, you participate in the lottery just by trying to solve a puzzle locally. Okay, so you don't have to tell someone that you're in the lottery. You don't have to buy a lottery ticket or something like that. And that ensures that no one knows whether you could have won the lottery until you actually make yourself known. Okay, the lottery is local, and a random unknown peer will win it. Furthermore, when you win, you will obtain a certificate that you won the solution to the puzzle. And then when you send your single message in the protocol, you send the certificate along. This ensures that when you act in this protocol, you have to speak exactly once, and then you never have to speak again. The reason for this design pattern is it's very strong in mitigating denial of service attacks. So if we imagine having the winner sitting here covertly, then the winner will not have to speak until it sends the message, and it's sitting in a random place, and it never has to speak again. So even if you have some all-powerful adversary out here on the peer-to-peer network that can do denial of service attacks, we assume that you can crucially push one message onto the network before you're killed by the denial of service attack. Okay, so that's why it looks as it does. And therefore, if just, let's say, 51% of the network can avoid being under a massive denial of service attack at any given point in time, we can actually establish consensus in a setting like this. Okay. There are other ways to do consensus in such adversarial networks, the famous one being the Algorand consensus algorithm. It works with proof of stake instead. So instead, it's a protocol now working in rounds, where in each round there is a committee and parties. And again, there's a lottery where you can win the right to execute some role, let's say being party 2 in round 3. Now it's done by proof of stake, which very simplified works as follows. So we assume that each party has a public key on the blockchain, and only that party knows the secret key. Now to try to participate in the lottery for this role here, you'll take the name of the role, it's a bit string R, you'll sign it with a unique signature scheme, a signature scheme with unique signatures. You will hash it. This is your random draw in the lottery. This is your number. You're trying to win this role. You multiply that by your stake, such that we ensure that people that have more stake invested in the system also get to play more roles. All in all, if this is above some threshold, you want the right to execute that role. Okay. If there's more winners, we'll just take the one with the highest such lottery ticket, and we'll run synchronously, say, so we can collect all of them in every round, so that if there's an honest winner, we will uniquely determine that honest winner, and that will be the one that gets to speak. They'll all speak and send their message along, but we use the message from the one with the highest lottery ticket. And then on top of that, Algorand is then running a Byzantine agreement protocol where you only have to speak once to run it. Okay. But the important thing here is, again, is the lottery. It has the same flavor as before. No one knows you're participating. No one knows that you won until you make yourself known. You get a certificate to prove that you won, namely the signature in this case. And by combination with the protocol, you have to only send a single message and then never speak again. So it's very hard to keep a system like this down using denial of service attacks. Okay. So there's 3 abstract things going on here. So there's these abstract roles that just describe something that should be done in the protocol. See who extends some block, being player 3 in round 7 or so on. Then there's this role assignment component, which will take physical machine and covert and randomly map them onto roles. They get to execute that role. And then there's the role execution layer, which is then what is the logical behavior of this role? What should the role do? Doesn't depend on which physical machine is doing it. Okay. Role assignment, role execution. One of the things I would like to advertise with today's work is that we should try to study these components, role assignment and role execution, separately. Right now, we are seeing this field here being kind of up and coming, and we're seeing a lot of cool protocols out there, but often these aspects are kind of very entangled. And I don't think it's doing anyone a favor. First of all, they're very separate. They have very little to do with each other often. So we might as well study them separately. And also, studying them separately would make it much easier for people to kind of enter the field. And that is one of my purposes with the talk today. I would like to see if I can draw people into doing research on the role execution space of MPC on blockchains. And you can do that without knowing much about role assignment. I'll try to show you how to do it today to invite you. So it's an invited talk, but also an inviting talk. Okay. So let's dive into it. Before I dive into role execution, the role execution component of MPC on blockchains, I would like to talk a little bit more about role assignment, just to set the stage so we're kind of all on the same page. Okay, so imagine the following. Let's say you build a blockchain and there's a huge population of peers, billions, millions, like everyone on the planet wants to be part of running this global-wide blockchain. We want to do MPC on it. Now, what you want to do, if you have, let's say, a round-based MPC protocol, is that for each round, you want to select a small subset of the peers at random so that you maintain honest majority. Let me say, I mean, a committee of the minimal size n such that you kind of have a good idea, a good chance that there's honest majority in the committee. Okay? Now, in doing that, we need to do it in a way that's scalable, such that the communication only depends on the size of committee, not the entire population, because that would kill us if we have to talk to everyone in every round of the protocol. We want to scalably select a small committee, okay, in a YOSO kind of way. And here, by scalable, I mean the communication. The communication should only depend on the committee you are sampling. Communication, it's not so bad. The bottleneck in these planet-wide peer-to-peer networks is clearly communication. I showed you some examples how to do it. Bitcoin does it, Algorand does it, proof of stake systems does it. But it turns out that if you want to do MPC, you need something that's slightly stronger than what is out there today. So most importantly, you need a way to send a secret message to a future role, which you don't in the Bitcoin. In the Bitcoin system, the peer is covert really until it speaks, and there's no way to speak to the next winner before it makes itself known. We will need that if we want to do MPC, and it's easy to see if, for example, P1 here, let's say P1 is an input role, it's giving a secret input to the computation. If you cannot send secret messages, I can take the entire rest of the system here and simulate it around P1, and then try alternative inputs for P2, P3, P4, and then evaluate the function on many alternative inputs from these guys. This is called a residual function attack, and it will leak a lot of information about the input of P1. So we need secret channels somehow. An obvious way to do it is say P1 wants to send a channel down here to P1 in the next round. Then we could have this role here make public a public key. We just encrypt under the public key. It decrypts, does its logic, and then it will send out its message in the protocol. The problem is that's not YOSO because it was speaking twice. It will make its public key known. Now its IP address is known. The denial of service attack comes and brings it down, and the system is broken. So we need to solve that. Fortunately, there's a really cool paper at TCC 2020 that solves this in a practical way. It goes as follows. So for each role that needs to have a public key before speaking, we'll have a delegator role that has the job to announce the public key. Okay, so we assume that everyone has a public key in a public key encryption system where the public keys can be randomized. So first we elect the delegator here in a scalable way using proof of stake, for example. Then the delegator will pick a random public key from the entire population of peers, randomize the public key and put it out and say, this is the public key of role P1 in the next round. And then everyone can send messages to P1 before P1 spoke. Okay, this is really cool. It's scalable if the election of the delegators is scalable. It has the disadvantage that the role here is now corrupted if either the delegator is corrupted and picks a corrupted peer, of course, or if an honest delegator by being unlucky picks a corrupted peer. So we are doubling the corruption budget of this peer. One of the things that we're working on, which is in the pipeline and being written up, is that you can actually do scalable role selection without doubling the budget. So remember, there was this delegator that picked a public key, we randomized it and made it public. So how do we get rid of a trusted entity using MPC? Well, we use MPC. So you just take the delegator, and then instead of having it be one trusted party, you just YOSO MPC it. Okay, it's a bit recursive, but you can do that because it's a much more simple functionality. So you can do a handmade tiny MPC for that. So what should this MPC do? So that we now, let's say what we can do is we take the client in a peer. We run the client inside a tiny YOSO MPC. There's now a little Oompa Loompa sitting inside the MPC. It needs one of the public keys, so it reaches out and picks one of the public keys from the entire population and takes it in. But it's a peer, so no one knows which public key it picked. And then it re-randomizes inside the MPC, and then it sends the public key out, and then we have a public key for the next role. So that's such a component sits here. It takes the entire population of public keys in, and then it will generate a key stream of pre-randomized public keys, each of these being a uniformly random one of these over here re-randomized. And then in just an open manner, depending on the protocol you want to run on top of this, you can take these re-randomized public keys and just map them onto roles. So now the first 8 roles here have their public keys, so they can be spoken to in a secret manner. There's a lot of details in there, and there's in fact a lot of cool research to be done, and I'm inviting anyone to take a look at it. So what's the right way to do these re-randomized key streams? How can you generate efficiently, scalably, such as a stream of re-randomized keys? Can we do it for proof of stake? Can we do it for asynchronous systems? Can we use IBE in some smart way, right? In the role execution layer, right, we want to send a message to a named role without knowing what the physical machine is, right? This really reminds me of IBE. I'm encrypting to the identity, that's the role. But then we need to get the secret key somehow to the physical machine that won the role. I tried this a couple of times. It doesn't lead to something practical, but maybe there's someone smarter than me out there on the line. Okay? So I think this is some really cool stuff to look at. There should be a lot of papers to be written about this. Let's hope we see some of them at the future SCN. That said about role assignment, I think we all now know what I mean by role assignment. Okay, now I want to get rid of it. Now I want to focus on role execution. So that protocol that we run after we assign all these public keys. So one of the things we're working on is proposing a YOSO model that makes it very easy to study MPC in this model. The design parameters have been simplicity and abstraction. So I would like to make it very easy to enter studying YOSO MPC. So I just want to throw everything away that's not needed to think about the MPC part, in particular the role assignment. I think a good parallel is the standard model for MPC that we have been using for more than 30 years. Sorry, I'm dry. The standard model, it just had n very abstract roles, P1 up to Pn, we call them. And then to study MPC, we just said, you know, give them pairwise authenticated channels or pairwise uniform, perfectly secure channels. Give them a broadcast channel. And then the question was, can we do MPC in this model, right? We all know that this is not a good model of praxis, but I mean, parallel to MPC, there's been rich areas of studying how to set up secure channels, authenticated key exchange, rich field of research doing, studying how to do consensus, how to do broadcast. And they've been mostly independent of the MPC part, right? I mean, we didn't know, we don't need to know how that works to do research on MPC. And there's been 30 years of fruitful MPC research in this very abstract model, right? So our vain hope is to now propose kind of the MPC model that will do the same for this YOSO kind of MPC, you know, where we try to do MPC with machines that each is allowed to speak just once, okay? So let's just jump into it to take some of the magic out of it. So this is the role, this is the model that we're proposing. So it'll just be a finite set of roles, just abstract names, they're bit strings with no other meaning. Like P2 being P1 in round 2, it doesn't need to be the same size rounds. It can be just, it's just a flat namespace that you can do with what you want. The way you program the model is for each of these roles, you get to specify a little virtual machine. That's the code that this role here will execute when it's turn to run. I mean, in the real world, we will do a lottery, pick a physical machine that comes and executes it, but that doesn't really matter, right? We just look at the model where we assume it's the role that executes it, is this little virtual machine. Then we'll do a leap of faith and study only static random corruptions, okay? So we'll have a corruption model where at the beginning of time, the environment only specifies kind of the corruption level it wants. A distribution in general. It says, I would like 25% of the roles to be corrupted. Then we say, okay, we are the security game in this case. So we then sample a uniformly random subset of all the roles, and those are then the corrupted ones. And then we announce this to the environment. These are the corrupted roles. So the environment doesn't get to pick roles to corrupt. It picks a distribution and we sample it and do the corruptions for it. We in the security game. Then we look at malicious corruption, crash corruption, that's fail stop, leaky, that's semi-honest, and honest. And we look only at static corruption. So at the beginning of time, when we sample which roles are corrupted, for the leaky ones, for example, we just take the randomness from that role and give it to the environment or the adversary. The malicious roles will be run by the environment, and otherwise it's just a normal UC model, okay? This might look weird to only look at static random corruption. I'll do a whole slide on it afterwards, but the main rationale is the following. Remember, we abstracted away a role assignment mechanism, which is covertly assigning random physical machine to roles. That means in the real world, where the adversary can corrupt a role, a chosen role, a physical machine, chosenly, that turns into a random corruption of a role because we're mapping physical machines to roles randomly out of the control of the adversary. So we might as well just consider random corruption over in the role execution space. And then, since they're random, we might as well just push that choice of randomness to the beginning of time. So we look at static random corruptions. Okay? Very simple model. Then in the standard models, we just give parties point-to-point channels and totally ordered broadcast. Totally ordered broadcast models a blockchain, right? We just say, you know, the blockchain, this is MPC for blockchain. I mean, but really, what is a blockchain? It's a totally ordered broadcast channel implemented in a particular way. We don't need to know how it works. We just assume we have it now. That was already done. Now let's see, can we do MPC in this setting too? Now that we have a broadcast channel. If you don't like this particular channel model, it's all done using ideal functionality. So you can just replace it with the ideal functionality you want. We're working in the UC model. However, since we're only considering synchronous computation, at least to begin with, even though the model also describes an asynchronous and a semi-synchronous and eventual delivery model. But for now, we only know how to do this synchronously. And since we only look at synchronous computation, only look at static random corruption, it turns out you can make a much simpler UC model, which we then did mostly as a kind of a service to make it easier to enter, right? But it's really just the UC model boiled down to the specific setting, so it's easier to start studying the YOSO MPC. Let's all breathe. So why only static random corruptions? First of all, as I said, chosen corruptions of physical machines will map by role assignment, if it's good, into random corruptions of roles. So let's just do random. And as I also said, I mean, just push that randomness to the beginning of time, then you have static corruptions. And in fact, since each machine only sends a single message, if you have static security, what you can do is say, okay, let's assume a model where only communication corrupts. So you cannot be corrupted if you just sit at home and you have all your plugs pulled out of the wall. You can only get corrupted when you talk. Then when you win the role, you're sitting behind your firewall. Now you can see you won the role. Then before you speak, you compute the message you should send, prepare it, you delete your entire state, then you plug, you go outside the firewall and you send your message, okay? Now you could get corrupted, but your state is gone. So you can basically take static security for single flow messages and turn it into adaptive security in the real world. There's a lot of complications that go into it, and it's a conjecture now. Someone should write that paper. But it's a leap of faith and saying, you know what, morally, it's enough to study static corruption. So what we're hoping with this model here is so simple that we can have people that did MPC before come and do blockchain MPC without knowing and caring about what a blockchain is. And that the techniques we discover by studying static random corruptions, we can take those and apply to praxis. The same way we did with MPC techniques we discovered in the standard model. I mean, this model doesn't exist, like we took them and then we engineered them into products, doing a lot of extra stuff. Right? So we want a model where we can discover new techniques that apply in general. And surely uniformly random static corruptions is not a perfect model of any role assignment mechanism, but our hope is it's a good approximation of most of them. So let's start with this model. There's two standard models one could look at here, an information theoretic one where we give people perfectly secure authenticated point-to-point channels and the totally ordered broadcast. I'm just going to call it the top from now on, and maybe sometimes the blockchain, and then unbounded adversary. We can also look at a computational setting where the adversary is computationally bounded, where we only have authenticated channels, but then instead we give everyone a public key. So we just postulate using an ideal functionality, something that gives everyone a public key at the beginning of time and gives the role the secret key. Okay? So that's the standard computational model. I would like to look at these. So what do we know? We can prove the following. You can take a model like this, and then you can tolerate that 49% of the roles are Byzantine corrupted, and still do MPC with guaranteed output delivery. That's optimal, because that you cannot do better in the normal model. Okay. I'm going to show you an information theoretic version, which is not particularly efficient, and it's actually possible also to do a practical secure protocol. It's basically a YOSO version of a protocol that has been implemented several times in practice, so it can also be done practically. Before I proceed into the techniques, I would like to mention a little bit related work. I'm going to miss a lot here because this is really an up and coming field. So I'm just going to take the two works that is really, really closest to ours and mention them. There's a really cool paper out called Fluid MPC. What it does is it notes that the BTW protocol, the secret sharing based semi-honest protocol, is basically already YOSO. And then they show how to take this protocol and add security with a bot to it in a YOSO model. This paper here hardwires into their model a particular role assignment mechanism, which is volunteering. They say, I mean, for the roles, you can come and say that you want to run a role. Taking at face value, that's a little bit fragile. As someone that would like to stop a particular computation could just come and volunteer for it and then drop one message and everything stops because there's only security with a bot. But actually, it looks like the protocol they're using would run in our YOSO model where you have random corruptions. And I actually think that kind of supports what I advocated before, that we should study role assignment and role execution separately. The protocol I described today could also run in the volunteer role assignment model. It wouldn't be particularly secure. And similarly, the Fluid MPC protocol could run on top of any other role assignment mechanism. So these are really almost completely separated aspects that we should study independently. Something very cool about this protocol is it has static activation. It means every role knows exactly at which point in time it has to execute. And then it has future horizon 1. That means you only have to send a message to the next round in the protocol. You don't have to send to someone that has to speak in a week from now. And in fact, I conjecture that in this model, I'll return to it later, you cannot do better than security with a bot. So there's actually no way to get guaranteed output delivery if you're only allowed to speak to the ones that act in the next round. But more on that later. It's a very cool paper. Then there's another cool paper out, which is not phrased as kind of YOSO MPC. What they're trying to do is sub-quadratic Byzantine agreement. But inside the belly of this thing, there's actually a tiny YOSO MPC component. What they're saying is, take a fully homomorphic encryption scheme, take the public key, put it on the blockchain. Actually, they're building blockchain, so put it on the blockchain. Take the secret key, secret share it onto a random unknown committee. And then if you want to do YOSO MPC, you just put your ciphertext out and then you compute on them fully homomorphically. And then this committee here in the next round will take the ciphertext and decrypt it. And then you open up, you have the result. Now they spoke, so they're dead, but at least you have the result. So that's one round of YOSO MPC. And then say, you know what, use that one round to sample the entire same setup for the next round inside the fully homomorphic encryption. To do that, they have to take all the public keys of the entire kind of population in and sample from them. But that doesn't, I mean, that's linear in the entire population, so it's not scalable. But it doesn't matter, because what they want to show here is that the YOSO model allows to do sub-quadratic communication. And for that, this is okay. That's also a really cool paper. You should take a look at that. Okay. Let's breathe again. So what I want to do now is jump into the YOSO MPC, the information theoretic secure protocol for honest majority. So what we're basically going to do now is say, okay, BTW is basically already YOSO, and then we're going to add some power tools from the last 30 years of MPC, Waking Ben or VSS and some other tricks, massage it into all being YOSO, and you will have a YOSO protocol. Okay. So we have a model like this here. The first thing we do, let's say I have a flat space of roles, 51% of them are honest, uniform at random. So the first thing I do is I take just chunks of size n, in this case here n is 4, and I form small committees. I pick n exactly big enough that I will end up having honest majority in each of them, except with negligible probability. I have a 1% gap, so I can do that. Of course, in practice, you would like to start from more like 60% and then sample, not sample, but pick size of committees big enough that 60% leads to honest majority in all the committees. Okay. So for now, just give me, I have a sequence of committees and some on the side with honest majority in each of them. Then I'll show you first how to do semi-honest YOSO. And this is just BTW. Remember that this one here, you go through a circuit, gate by gate, input gates, add, mult, output, and there's also some fan out we have to deal with. And what we'll do is we'll simply take and say each gate has a new fresh committee on it, someone that didn't have to speak earlier. And they will end up having the secret sharing of the value of the gate. Okay. And And then you just note that BTW, the only thing that protocol does is resharing shares, either sharing the input or taking a share of a sharing and resharing that. And then you just do that onto the next committee, the committee that needs it. And then you go through the circuit like that. Okay. That's really what there is to it. But to prove to you that I'm not lying, neither lazy, I actually wrote down the protocol, but I'm not going to go through it. Let's just strike down in 2 places. Okay, so we have an input gate here, for example. It has some input role that holds X, and then there's a committee associated with that gate. And then the input client will simply take the value and share it onto that committee. They didn't speak it, they just received the value under their public key. Or on, in this case, a perfectly secure channel, we're assuming in the information theoretic model. If you want to add, the committee will simply add. I mean, all the inputs needed for the gate will share onto the same committee. For the mult, you'd have to do a little bit more because there's 2 rounds, but it's not rocket science. If you have fan out, if you have the value of a gate that needs to be used by several future gates, that gate committee of the gate, when they act, when they speak the one time they have to, they will, each of them will take their share and then reshare to the committee that will need the value later. And then they can interpolate the value. So now you moved along all the fan out wires this value. And that is the entire protocol. Okay. So semi-honest YOSO is possible with output delivery. It's easy with semi-honest. So what I'm going to do now is then it's just a standard trick. We take the semi-honest version and then we compile it into a Byzantine one using verifiable secret share. I'll secret share every value from the semi-honest protocol. We have an arithmetic protocol. I can compile any one, in particular one we just saw. Field elements are being sent, they're being added, and they're being multiplied. That's the only thing that's going on. So we just need to deal with those 3 things. I'm going to use verifiable secret sharing. So I assume that I can create a secret sharing of a value sitting on some committee, G. So I'm going to write this as follows: S secret shared onto G. G actually consists of 2 committees, one that holds the share and one that holds some check values. I'm just going to call it one committee. It has the property that if all the honest parties make their share and check values public, then even though the corrupted committee members would send crap values, we can reconstruct this. And in fact, they're homomorphic. Okay? I'll show you how to build such a thing in a few slides. And then I'll use a power tool, which is called a storage stack, which is a uniformly random value R, verifiably secret shared L times onto independent committees. So they don't share any role. Okay? That's very redundant. That's a way to get to use the same value again and again, because let's say I reconstruct this one here, then all the servers that held the share had to speak, so now they're dead. But I have another copy here. We're going to use that. Okay. So getting to that point of having storage stacks is important. Let's assume I can do storage stacks. Then I have a storage stack for each field element of the semi-honest protocol. And then for anything I would like to do with a field element, there's a tiny protocol using storage stacks. Let's say in the semi-honest protocol, a receiver wants to send a field element to a sender. That should probably have been the other way around, right? The sender wants to send a field element to a receiver. Okay, sorry. Anyway, so what we do is we take a fresh storage stack. Let's say we generated a lot of them. And then the first committee here will reconstruct R onto the sender and the receiver. And then what the sender will do when it wants to send a field element X, it will compute a one-time path encryption using the random value that it now knows, and then just drop that on the totally ordered broadcast. From there, the receiver can pick it up and then adjust and have the element X. Importantly, the receiver will also be committed to it, because all the remaining committees in the storage stack, they will also pick up this difference. And then they will just adjust their verifiable secret sharings of R into verifiable secret sharings of X. So now we have backups of this value that was sent. Okay. In particular, now imagine that R in the future has to do something in the protocol and it doesn't. Then we can just have the second committee here reconstruct X in public. And in fact, for every field element that went into this role, we open them up on the top. And then we just compute this role in public. We know what it should have sent. And it's okay to open it up because it was corrupted. It didn't do its job, right? So we didn't lose any security by doing that. So if we have storage stacks, we are done. We're basically done, okay? That was how to send them. We also need to add them and multiply them. To add them, use that the VSSs are homomorphic. You have to be much more clever than that in terms of logistics. Like when you want to add stuff in different storage stacks, they need to share a committee. Otherwise, the VSSs, you can't add them. It needs to be the same people holding them. So there's some kind of logistic that depends on the circuit you're computing, how these storage stacks lines up. But given a good afternoon, you can do that. Field elements have to be multiplied also. We have a field element A and B, each in a storage stack, and some role knows A and B. So we just ask the role to multiply them. Let C put them into a storage stack by announcing the difference on the top. And then there is a pretty standard signal protocol, which will allow to prove consistency of such committed values. Now, doing a signal protocol YOSO style is not trivial, and in fact, I'll spend some slides on that soon. But after you saw those slides inside the belly of how to do the VSS, you can come back and do this probably another good afternoon, but you'll be able to do this part here also. Okay, so that's it. We know how to send, add, and multiply, and keep everything inside a storage stack, and we're done. We can do recovery on any value. So let's see, how do we do VSS and storage stacks? The first tool we'll need, this is not rocket science, is pushing a value to the future. Okay, so remember, we're in a YOSO protocol, so it means there is, if you have a value that you need to use later, but you speak now, you can't use it later because you will die when you speak. You only speak once. So the solution to that is, if I have to do something now, I have to announce a value, and I know I will be killed immediately afterwards by denial of service attack. And I know there's another value I should send later. I'll just push it to the future using secret sharing. So I do it's almost a verifiable secret sharing, except we have to trust the sender. So the sender computes a secret sharing of the value, computes some check values, gives the secret sharing to one committee, and gives the keys for the check values to another committee. And then if this value is needed in the future, first the committee holding the shares will open them up, and then the committee holding the check values will open them up, and then we check the shares. We do it in 2 rounds to mitigate the threat of a rushing adversary. Okay? But that's really what there is to it. If the sender is corrupted, it could send inconsistent sharings to the future that could then open to different stuff later. Doesn't matter. It's no worse than the corrupted sender having walked to the future in a normal model and then cheated. What's important here is that if the sender is honest, then the check values ensures that only the intended M can be opened later. They also ensure by construction that this intended M can be reconstructed and that it's hidden until it's unveiled in the future. So this is almost the same as S just having kind of teleported to the future and then sent in itself. Right? So we have the first tool to kind of combat the YOSO problem. Okay. I'm going to write that as just S in parentheses, that is S pushed to the future. This is a better tool than it looks. For example, it allows us to take a single verifiable secret sharing and turn it into a storage stack. So what we can do is the following. Let's say I could get to build a verifiable secret sharing of a single uniformly random value known by nobody. So what is a verifiable secret sharing? It's just a huge distributed object with field elements sitting in some peers in the system. So what I can say is anyone that has a field element that corresponds to my VSS here, take that field element, push it to the future, and then blow yourself up. If they do blow up when they push to the future because they have to send something, right? So we lose the original VSS, but we just pushed it to the future. Now everything blew up, like every share now became N share, but as for feasibility, this works. I have another copy of the VSS in the future. Note that since I push a VSS, I actually have a VSS again, right? Because when I push an honest share, that correct honest share will be opened in the future. When I push a corrupt share, it might in the future be open to something different, but the VSS could already tolerate that. I'm pushing an object that could tolerate that the corrupted parties are opening up wrong shares. So I actually get a VSS again, just not nearly as efficient as the first one. And now what I can do, I just take the original VSS and then I just push it L times to the future. Then I have L VSSs, of the same value, because VSS is open to a unique value, and each of them would just push correctly. Okay? That's not particularly efficient, and I don't know any other way of doing it. If you do, you should write a paper about that. Okay, it's really hard to get consistent stuff in the future, and I'll talk about that on the next slides coming up. Okay, but now we can focus on just creating a single VSS. Then we will have storage stacks for free. Looking forward, the way we'll do a VSS is to do, again, a degree T secret sharing, and then we'll put some information check values by Rabin and Benhor on these shares, kind of information theoretic signatures. And we need to do that because when we have only honest majority, when we open something in the future, we need a way to recognize the T+1 honest shares, because there might be only T+1 honest shares. So we need to be able to rule out the corrupt one. So we need signatures. And in fact, we need randomness. We cannot do this perfectly. The information check values is doing exactly that trick. So what's an information check value? I would like to take you through that because it's a good kind of test bed or demonstration place for showing some of the techniques needed to YOSO some of the existing protocols. Okay? So it's an information theoretic MAC. Concrete that the MAC is a pointer on a line and the key is the line in some finite field. It's computed by the sender. So we compute a MAC on the key K that gives us a MAC capital M on a small m. Okay? The sender gives to the intermediary the message and the MAC, and it gives to the receiver the key. The intention here being that the intermediary at the point where the original sender is gone can reveal M and only M to the receiver. That works if the sender is honest. The problem is if the sender is corrupted and gives the wrong key, an inconsistent key over here, then the honest intermediary will look like a cheating intermediary. The MAC doesn't check out, and we need to rule that out somehow. The way that is done is that the sender will compute a random instance of the problem, a random message, a random key L, compute a random MAC R, and then we'll open a linear combination of them. So it looks like this. So let's just say for now, some beacon will put on the totally ordered broadcaster uniformly random challenge E. Then the intermediary will compute this linear combination of the M and the random M, E times M plus R. That's a one-time pad encryption of E times M, so it's okay. We can make that public, so we make it public. We do the same with the MAC, we do the same with the key, and S will also do the same. And everyone will top these values, and then there is some nitty-gritty details dealing with the conflicts. Okay, that's how it works. Turns out if that random instance checks out, the original instance was also consistent. And then we have this thing set up. Okay. Zooming in on the intermediary, how would it look YOSO style? Well, first you have to make these two values public for the check. And now you know that in a second you will be dead. So you take your MAC M and your message M and you push it to the future where it can be put again. Okay? That's how you do it. Except that doesn't work. The problem is at the places where we use information check values, those are places where we exactly need to check M against the value later. We need to check consistency of a commitment. Okay, so I need to take M and compare it to something. Now I pushed it. Now it's secret shared. I cannot compare a secret sharing to some value 7. A tempting thing to do is open it up. So I take this M and I give it to some role that will do the comparing. But remember, each role is uniformly at random, independently corrupted. So now I showed M to 2 different roles. So now the adversary has 2 chances to learn M, so we doubled his corruption budget again. That's a bad idea. We don't want to do that. Starting to do a YOSO MPC that compares a value to another value, that's recursive. Comparing values is even harder than multiplying and adding them, okay? So we are in a little bit of trouble here, okay? So I want to show you one of the tools that get you out of trouble in the YOSO model. So here's the problem first, okay? You can't have your cake and eat it too. So I think we have a prover here. A prover is holding some object X and it has some structure, claim structure. It's a consistent secret sharing. There's a witness to that. For example, the coefficients of the polynomial. In fact, this is a distributed object and the prover is a distributed prover. But for now, just think of it as a single prover in a Sigma protocol. It sends the first message, creates the object maybe also in that flow onto the totally ordered broadcast. some beacon will generate a uniformly random challenge onto the broadcast. In fact, I'm just going to postulate a beacon for now in this talk. But if you look at the paper, you will see that we can actually implement this beacon in the YOSO model itself. Okay. Anyway, so we get a uniformly random challenge E, and then we reply on the top again. Okay. So this is what we can't do because you're speaking even twice here. And once you spoke, you're dead. So you don't even have the object anymore because the prover here has spoken, thereby eating the cake. So you can't have the cake. It's sitting on servers that are now dead. This is how you do it. So take the prover. The prover again sends the first message in the Sigma protocol. Then it computes replies to challenge 0 and to challenge 1. And it pushes both of them to the future onto different committees. So there's a committee G1 holding the reply to 0, committee G1 holding the reply to 1. Then the beacon will generate a uniformly random challenge, put it on the top, and then the committee holding the corresponding answer will open it up. Okay, so now they cannot speak again. They have eaten the cake, but we still have the cake, or at least some of the cake. Namely, we have the second answer sitting on another committee that we could open it up. Since this is a protocol, it's a Sigma protocol, and it has special soundness, we in fact have the entire cake still. Because note that if this committee would later open up that reply, then we have 2 correct replies in a Sigma protocol, and that would allow us to compute the witness up there. Okay, so we had a witness sitting here, we proved something about it, and then it sits down here again, just in a slightly different form, so we still have the cake. That's the trick that gets you out of trouble. Okay. That's the first observation. If you want to do zero knowledge in a YOSO model, you should not do cut and choose. You should do PCP type proofs, where you create an object that you then store, and then someone will inspect some points, and the points you didn't look at should still be your object. Okay, that sounds like fun. There must be some paper to write about that, to do that efficiently for particular types of proofs and so on, right? You should do that. Note here that these 2 committees, G0 and G1, they have dynamic activation, right? One of the committees have to speak now, and another committee have to speak in the future. Can you get around that? It would be nice if you always knew when you had to speak. I don't know how to do that. In fact, I don't know how to do VSS for T less than half with static activation, and I conjecture that you cannot. Okay. There's obviously still some details to be done here before we have information check values, but the trick is this. You do what I did on the previous slide to your Sigma protocol. You only have soundness 1/2 now, but you can look at a stored cut and choose proof like this with 1 bit challenge as a secret sharing of the witness, right? If you have both answers, you get the witness. If you only have 1, you get nothing, right? So basically now you just go and do a K out of 2K secret sharing of the witness instead, and you open a random K positions, and then you're good. If there's a single correct answer remaining in the K you didn't open, that will give you the original witness. So that's how you do it. Then we have information check values, and then it's really take off. Okay. Then it follows a pretty standard path for information theoretic MPC with honest majority. First thing you do is do commitments to the future. The way you do that is you commit, and first you secret share the secret, and then you commit each of the committee members, or you put information check values on each of the shares, so you sign them. Now again, of course, a corrupted dealer here could send an incorrect secret sharing, but what you then do is the standard thing. You also do a secret sharing of a random value. You do a cut and choose protocol where you open a linear combination, some machinery around resolving conflicts, and that Sigma protocol I just used, you turn it into one of these stored cut and choose proofs instead. And you're good, you have commitments to the future. And then you have VSS. So you do the same 1 more time. To commit to a value, you secret share it. And then you commit to each of the shares. And then you ask each of the servers that hold a share to also commit to it. So it's here. So this is the holder, I committing to the share. This is the dealer committing to the share. You do again a cut and choose protocol to check consistency of this. Turn that into a stored cut and choose protocol. And then you're good. Then you have secret share, consistently secret shared value, and you have the holders now being committed to the share. When you want to open it in the future, you ask these holders to make the share public and open that commitment. And since T+1 of them are honest, that's why we need the holders to do the commitment. They will open it, so you can recover S. And since we checked consistency with the commitment of the dealer, it will be the correct S when the dealer is honest. That's the VSS. You lift it, you have your storage stacks, and then you do BDW on top of that. Okay, that's how you do it. You might have noticed that I kept saying you're lifting, you're sharing, you're lifting, you're sharing, you do parallel cut and choose, blah, blah, blah. And every time I did that, I multiplied by N of the security parameter K. Okay, so I said there's liftoff, but we also build a machine like this. Okay, it's going to be pretty amazing if it flies. So, I mean, I don't know, I didn't compute the complexity exactly here, but there's room for improvement, okay? You should look at that. Then I was optimistic and prepared slides for the computationally secure version, but it should now have been 1602 for me to have time to do that, I see. So I'm going to skip over that. I'm going to say it very briefly. You go back and take a paper by Kramer, Damgaard, and Nielsen from 01. And then you notice that it is basically YOSO already. And then you do a little bit of machinery. That's not magic, but what's cool about it is you really don't touch the complexity much. And this has been implemented in practice. It requires setup. It requires that you can do a public key for threshold additive homomorphic encryption scheme, and then secret share the key onto the first committee. Then you will pass it to the future by resharing all the time, like doing proactive secret sharing. That's what there is to it. I'm going to skip that now to get to my closing remarks. Okay, so what just happened? I showed you how to do YOSO MPC in a model with secure channels where every machine is only allowed to speak once. I would like you to look at that and try to do that because I think it's important and fun. First of all, it protects against denial of service attacks. It's the ultimate version of proactive security. Remember that proactive security is you have an ongoing computation where you have a state. And if you have been broken into, the adversary knows your state. So if you have a mobile adversary, when he leaves, you would like to refresh your state. You know what? Why not just speak once? And before you speak, you burn your state and you never need it again. That's proactive security if there ever was proactive security, right? It also fits very well these up-and-coming serverless architectures where you don't have a server running. You only spin your server up exactly when it needs to speak. You can do the same here. You just run YOSO, don't have a server at all. When you realize you won the lottery once a week, you spin up something in the cloud, bring the machine up, speak, bring it down again. Also, if you do YOSO MPC, you can tell all your cool blockchain friends that you're doing blockchain actually without doing blockchain. Okay, so if I convinced you that you should do this, here's something to look at. Some parameters. What would we like to do better compared to what we have now? One thing that's important is the future horizon. This thing here that in the protocols I described, sometimes you have to send values very far into the future. You have to speak to a future committee that's handling a gate. If you have a circuit with very long wires into the future, it means I have to send a value very far into the future. This is really annoying for the role assignment mechanism because it needs to get the public key for this role ready already when it needs to be spoken to. And in proof of stake role assignment mechanisms, this is a little bit fragile. It means we'll be sampling the public key for this here based on stake in the past. So it could be that the one that wins the role doesn't have stake in the system anymore, or that the stake shifted a lot. So we don't want very long future horizon, okay? So it would be very nice to look at how small a future horizon can we get in YOSO MPC, and how does it compare with the efficiency of the protocols. Another thing is the static dynamic triggering I talked about. Can we get static triggering? So I drew a figure here where each role is speaking at a specific point in time. But you also saw in my protocol that that's what's not the case. In stored cut and choose, some of the committees have to speak now and some in the future. If you're doing a serverless architecture where you only bring up your server when it has to speak, it would be nice to know when it has to speak, right? Because when it has to speak, it has to be now. So if there's a long period where it might suddenly have to speak, you need to have your server running in that period. And probably you have your secret key out of cold storage, and you're paying for renting the machinery. How short can we get it? That's what I call the past horizon here. If you have dynamic triggering, I think it's very nice to at least have public triggering, such that you know when a role should have spoken. Because in some of these proof of stake systems, you have what's called slashing, where you punish people that don't execute their role. Then it would be nice to be able to just like blankly, publicly, verifiably detect when should the role have spoken, and if it didn't, you punish it down in the role assignment mechanism. Then there's all the old cash cows, right? We can look at communication complexity. There's certainly something to do there. Also, it's very, very interesting. How does the round complexity of this more challenging model compare to the round complexity of the standard model? Okay. Here, round complexity is kind of the longest path of communications going on in this graph here. There's plenty to look at, and I invite you to come and look at it. Here are 4 conjectures. If you didn't have motivation enough, I'm now going to conjecture 4 things just so we have a chance to prove me wrong. Okay. Here's what, and mostly because I would love to be proven wrong. Okay. So if you want to do YOSO MPC and you want Byzantine corruption and you want 49% corruption corresponding to honest majority, then I don't think you can get static triggering and horizon 1. I don't think you can get a model where each round the parties only speak to the parties in the next round. You need to do something like cut and choose and stuff, and that requires these dynamic committees. It's just a gut feeling. I would love for someone to prove a lower bound here or to prove me wrong. I don't think you can get static triggering and horizon 1 with computational MPC either, unless you allow setup, then you can actually do it. And I also think we will be punished on complexity. There's something to this pushing to the future that seems to cost you a factor of n. So I mean, remember that in the MPC model, we could get down to a complexity that was basically fully logarithmic in the original circuit, sometimes even constant in the circuit in terms of communication. I think here we will have to pay a factor of n. But even getting down there will be a long journey. I mean, what we have now is pretty inefficient. Finally, my 4th conjecture is that at least one of these 4 conjectures are false and at least one of them is true. The protocols I described and working out the model is John worked with Craig, Shai, Hugo, Bernardo, Tyler, and Sophia, and talking to a lot of other people around this problem here. And that's what I had to say. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, Jesper. This was a really nice talk. I really enjoyed watching it and listening it, and I'll have to watch it a couple more times to understand more details about it. So let's see if people have questions so far. I posted on the chat a message that if you have questions, please post, and then I'll read it. Okay, so slides and
yeah, I just put it into the slides in case someone wants them.
Yes, yeah, I see that slide. So slides. Okay, yeah. So slides. Yeah, Jesper posted for everybody. It's not just for me. Okay. All right. So we have a couple of minutes for questions. Reminder. Well, let me see what I could ask. So a general comment is from me is that this is really elegant. The YOSO. I wasn't really following these developments in blockchain and SP1s, but I think Jesper convinced me that that's a very interesting thing to look at. But how can you repeat? Maybe it's easy intuition, Jesper. How is a receiver? How do you send a message in the future? Because nobody knows who that player with that role will be, including that player. So is that what you said is going to be using these delegators, the cool paper number 1 that you cited?
Yes, I mean the way that is done. I mean, if I can bring up the slides here again, is that I mean what you're doing is well ahead of time. But I mean, let's just say everyone in the system has a public key that's on the blockchain, it's known. For now, let's just say we have a trusted party here that would now and then just pick one of these keys at random, then re-randomize it, and then output it and say, this is the public key of someone in the system. We randomize the key so no one knows which physical machine it corresponds to. And then we'll just take that public key and then assign it to one of the roles over here, and we'll do it well in advance. So if someone at this point in the protocol would actually need to talk to this role down here, I would at this point take one of these random public keys and give it to this party. And interestingly, it does not even have to come alive yet, right? Because now everyone can send encryptions to it, just dump them on the blockchain. And then at the point in time where this role here should execute, the one that won the right to execute this role will just spin up a machine and execute it. Now, of course, that's very fragile because there's one trusted party knowing that, I mean, who's executing all the roles. But then the first thing you could do is this thing, right? You say, you know, for each role, pick it using one of the normal lotteries, like proof of stake lotteries. You appoint a delegator for that role. So now at least half the roles are delegated by honest parties. And you can go even further and say, you know what? This delegator role, you can recursively MPC that one using, for example, a peer. So there's a lot of stuff. I mean, doing it with a peer is something we're actually just writing up right now. Oh yeah, I should say that there's a paper for what I talked about here. It's coming up on ePrint one of the coming weeks. I want to say this week, but maybe it's next week. If before that you're really eager to see the paper, write me and I might send you a preliminary copy of it. Okay, but that's how you do it. So you generate these re-randomized keys and then you assign them to the future and you use those to send messages into the future.
And how does this relate to this role assignment based on the hash that you mentioned earlier, like past the threshold?
That is then, in this case, in this setting here, that's how you would elect the delegator here. So if you want to elect a delegator and you want him to be honest with a good probability, you would exactly elect that delegator role, say using the proof of stake.
I see. So only the delegator roles could be those hash, based on the hash, and the other roles are assigned by the delegators.
You can do slightly more elegant stuff. They're saying the delegator doesn't get to pick the role. It actually has to do another lottery that picks the role and then prove that it did that correctly. So it doesn't get to pick the role. But the thing is, it would still know the identity of this player before it has to act. So if it's corrupted, it could tell this to the evil red eye there, then it just does a denial of service attack up front. So we need some honest delegators, right? So either you delegate them or you NPC them. And in particular, that thing, really kind of doing a tiny NPC of this delegator role, I think that is ripe for research to find the right way to do that. One way we are doing it, and that's working, is really just running a peer, right? Because this is somehow a peer, right? You want to pick a random public key from a public database and no one should know which one you did. So you run a little peer inside a box here that picks a public key, re-randomizing, and then puts it out. And there are pretty efficient peer schemes around, but there could be many other smart ways of doing that kind of key stream generation there.
Okay, more questions. So we have the next session starts in 5 minutes. That's a blockchain session. I guess we can finish now. I have some more questions, but I guess let me ask that. So
and contact out of banks. Yeah.
The eat cake and eat it. So this was a 50% chance of being caught, and I didn't fully understand. You have a solution to have a better soundness?
Yes. So what I mean, if you look at a Sigma protocol, right? I mean, somehow, if I reply to both 0 and 1, and in fact, let's say I replied to 7 different challenges, then I did a 2 out of 7 secret sharing, right? If you get any 2 shares, you can reconstruct.
Okay, so okay. All right.
And then we do a K out of 2K. That takes some massaging. For most Sigma protocols, you can do that. And then you open K positions. If they're all
Yeah.
correct,
Yeah.
then it
Yeah.
would be weird if the remaining K ones
So
are
you
all.
cut and choose. You basically do cut and choose. Not the two was just a base case, and then you do a cut and
Yes.
choose. So
But the cut and choose is a little bit hard, right? Because the object that you proved something about initially, it's gone now because the ones that had to talk. So we have to do it in parallel, and this. So you have to be a bit more careful to choose. But otherwise, yeah, you're repeating in parallel, so to say. Just repeating in parallel.
Okay. Okay. So thank you again, Jesper. It was fantastic talk. I really enjoyed it. Yeah. So this is recorded. I'm not sure. Maybe Clement. I think it's going to be on YouTube. I don't know if it was streaming on YouTube, and it's going to be. But I think that's where it will appear, and Clement will confirm that.
Yeah, sure.
So are we? Well, now we have 5-minute break, so people can have their coffee or the opposite, and then we move in 4 minutes to the next session. Thank you.
Is that on the same channel here?
Yes. Well, Clement will answer it, but I think it's on the same channel.
Sorry, say it again.
Everybody is staying. Like next session remains on the same Zoom channel.
Yes, sure. I have nobody moves. Just and come back in 5 minutes.
Okay, and we don't even need to stop the recording. Anyway, Clemente, you will control the recording.
Yeah, sure.
Unpause. Okay, thank you all, and be back in a few minutes, 4 minutes.
Okay, I really hope everybody got a coffee. So I think that
Yeah, Juan is here. He can take over.
okay.
I'm trying to make my camera. Oh, there it is. So nice production out there, Clemente. Although I must say, yeah, I'm
Thanks.
hungry already. I'm hungry looking at the mozzarella and stuff.
Okay, great. We'll send
All
you
right.
one.
Okay, so we're ready to get started. All right. So next session is about blockchain primitives and constructions. Then we have roughly 10 minutes per talk with some couple of questions, and hopefully we'll have some time for questions at the end. And first talk is by, oops, I'm looking at the, it's account management in proof of stake ledgers by Dimitri Karakostas, Aglos Kiayas, and Mario Larangueira. And Dimitri is going to be giving the talk, and the floor is yours.
Thank you, Juan. Let me share the slides also. Right, hopefully you can see my slides. Yes, as you said, this is a joint work with Aglos Kiayas from the University of Edinburgh and Mario Larangueira from Tokyo. And what I'm going to talk here now is about account management proof of stake ledgers. So first of all, let me start with some distinctions between proof of work and proof of stake. So in proof of work, typically, we have the miners that participate, and they are responsible for, well, updating the ledger so that they create new blocks and they extend the ledger and they publish transactions. And we assume that the miners need to be online in order to participate in the system. And proof of stake, it's a bit more complex because the players that are responsible for participating, for running the consensus algorithm and creating new blocks, are the people that actually own the assets that are managed over the system. So these stakeholders, they need to be online for security. And in some cases, there is even not very clear distinction on who owns the assets. For example, in case of exchanges that might keep assets as custodians for other users, it's not obvious who should participate on behalf of whom and how the assets should be managed. So in this work, what we do is we try to look into all these issues for proof of stake ledgers and how a wallet, or actually how management of these assets should happen, what properties a wallet should have in order to ensure that security is preserved, and also that the functionality that we want to achieve from the ledger is maintained. So our major contribution is a proof of stake wallet framework that actually describes all that we want to do. So the first step in our analysis is the desiderata. So what do we want the proof of stake wallet to achieve? So, and we divide these desiderata in three major categories. So first of all, we have the addresses, which are the main objects of the ledger, and they define the ownership of the assets. So we want addresses to have multiple properties, such as uniqueness. We don't want to have two same addresses and defining the multiple assets, or we want to be address to be identifiable on the ledger, so someone that owns an asset can simply retrieve the address from the ledger. And then we have the operations. What can we do with the wallet? And there, we divide these operations between staking and payment. So payment is practically the operation of transferring assets. And this is managed by a single key, the payment key. And then we have a distinct key, which is for staking, that is participating in the system and creating new blocks, for example, or doing other consensus-related operations or system-related operations. And the reason why we do this is, first of all, because we want to minimize the attack surface on the payment keys, because the payment key is the one that defines ownership and is the one that allows the user to prove themselves to the system. And also we want to have some more flexibility on how to manage the keys, where to run each key, and perhaps have some kind of secure execution of the wallet, as we describe in the paper in the form of wallet modes. And one of the operations that can be done is delegation, which is to give the rights of participating in the system to a third party. Now, when we did this analysis, an interesting property that came up was malleability of addresses. And the reason that malleability exists is because an address now incorporates multiple attributes, that is the multiple keys. And whether an adversary is able to manipulate an address in order to define, for example, a malicious staking key combined with a correct or an honest payment key, is described by the malleability levels. In our paper, we define multiple levels of malleability and multiple predicates that can be used to distinguish between those levels during the construction of the wallet. And the construction of the wallet is done by a functionality, an ideal functionality, which does two major types of operations. So first of all, it creates addresses. And second of all, it issues signatures using the payment keys. So the addresses that are created incorporate the two keys, payments and staking keys. And then following, or inspired rather, by Canetti's ideal functionality for signatures, we define the actions that the wallet can do, such as transferring ownership or signing certificates for the various actions that the wallet needs to do. And the functionality is also parameterized by the malleability predicate that defines what kind of security can we get regarding this type of attack. And in the end, in our paper, we also, after defining the functionality, after defining the protocol that implements the functionality and the various building blocks of the protocol, we look into how this wallet and these new types of operations like delegation affect the system's security. So if we have stake pools, for example, that might get the rights of participating in the system from other users, what kind of attacks can occur and what kind of security we have. And we look into two types of attacks, Sybil attacks and replay attacks. And we show how these attacks can be solved in the context of stake pools. And finally, the intuition that we arrive at is that when you have stake pools and when a user can delegate their participation rights to other users, what we are interested in when we try to argue about the security is not who owns the stake, but rather who has the rights of the stake. So as long as the stake pools or the parties that have the rights of the stake are honest and have the majority of the stake, the system should be secure, regardless if, for example, the majority of the assets are owned or can be transferred by malicious parties. So yeah, this is a very brief overview of the paper, and then I guess you can find the paper and the full presentation on the website of the conference. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Dimitri. Any questions for Dimitri? So how does it work, Vlad? People post questions in the chat, or they can speak?
No, people cannot speak. Yeah, it's just chat or Q&A.
Where are you from again? I'm joking.
Huh?
Reference to recent events.
For the recent events, yeah. Oh, where I'm calling from, yeah. Gotcha.
So Dimitri, what is? I have a question. What is protocol security parameter? Would that be in the stake setting? Your previous slide.
Right here. Right. So, well, here the parameter is, well, we have two parameters. The first parameter is the security parameter. So this, well, it's a classic parameter in consensus. For example, it's 1/3 or 1/2, depending what kind of protocol you have, right?
Okay, so that kind of security parameter.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So it's the level of stake that you need to be honest in order for the system to be secure.
Okay, and what protocol have you proved existing protocols that are securing for this? Or?
Well, yeah. So in the full version of the paper, we look into Ouroboros browse, and we look into how this model or this wallet amendment affects security in that protocol, and we show that it can be secure following our definitions. So if you connect practically the ledger with the wallet that we define, then we can achieve a secure execution of that protocol.
Yeah, and how about Algorand-like protocols?
Right, we haven't done this yet, but I haven't done it, but I believe that the framework that we provide is generic enough so as to be able to also be applied on other proof of stake protocols. I mean, that was our goal also, to try to make it as generic as possible, so as not to confine ourselves in a specific proof of stake protocol.
Right. Okay, thanks. I guess we're gonna keep going then to the second talk. Okay, thanks, Dimitri. And I think we're gonna have some more time at the end.
Yeah, let me try it.
Yeah, I think panelists probably should hang around until the end, and maybe people will conjure up some questions.
All right, so next talk. And it's Afgjord. Forgive my Danish pronunciation. A partially synchronous finality layer for blockchains, and this is by Thomas Dinsdale Young, Bernardo Magri, Christian Matt, Jesper Nielsen, and Daniel Schutte. And Mr. Schutte is going to be given the talk. Okay, go ahead.
Yes, I actually need. Yes, perfect. Yeah. Now I can start to share things.
Transmitting from, he's broadcasting from the lake in Zurich, or?
Yeah, kind of. That's the beach right in Zurich. Looks like that always. Can you see the slides?
Yeah.
Okay, all right. So welcome to this short version of the Algorand talk. So this is, as the title already suggests, it's about the finality layer. So before we can talk about that, let's quickly look at the setting we're in. So we assume we have some sort of network. Think of the internet. It's a peer-to-peer network. We assume partially synchronous communication. That is, there is a network delay, but the bound on that delay is not known to parties. In particular, we cannot use the bound in our protocol. Then we assume some sort of blockchain. I mean, Jesper described it quite nicely in his talk. It's Nakamoto-style consensus. So you have a lottery, and the lottery winner can actually add blocks to the best chain. So what you actually get is kind of a block tree, and your best chain, that's kind of the thing which you have the ledger upon. So why bother about finality? Why not just stay with such a consensus, right? I mean, it works. We know it from Bitcoin. It's all about when can we, for instance, trust the transaction? When is it kind of settled? So if you look at, say, Bitcoin, right? If you have low corruption, a fast network, your chain might look like the chain on top there. So it's more like a chain and not a tree. So honest parties kind of agree almost on the whole chain. I mean, as you can see here, their prefix, the common prefix is kind of long. But unfortunately, right, if you have high corruption or a slow network, messages, blocks take time to progress. Your tree might look like here in the bottom. So there is a lot of forking, and honest parties do not agree on that much of their block trees. And so how do you consider a transaction settled? Well, there's this pruning of chains you normally do, right? This, for instance, 6-block rule. You chop off X blocks, and you consider whatever is remaining of your best chain considered to be final. And that, of course, needs that this is in the common prefix of honest parties. And this brings us to the problem, right? That is, we need to make a worst case assumption, right? X is a fixed number, so whatever we take away, it must even work, even if we are in the bad case where we have max corruption, max delay. So as you can see here in the top of the picture, right, that's this case. But unfortunately, when we have good weather condition, that's too many blocks. So here is where finality kicks in. So what's the idea of finality? Well, we start with our block tree and we go over it and try to agree on what we consider final. So we just stamp things, and what is not on that final part of the chain just goes away, grays out. We continue like that and so on. And our hope is now that in contrast to a pruned chain, we can do that kind of adaptively. So in good weather conditions, we can have faster confirmation of transaction than just by pruning a chain. So in our paper, we define some desired properties of what we want from finality. Of course, we need agreement. It should be chain forming. That is, when we have two final blocks, they should be on a chain. So it makes no sense to have a fork finalized. And then the third property we'd like to have is this, what we call up-to-date property. That is, we should be close to the edge of this tree. So finalization cannot go behind. It should be close to the leaves of the block tree. That makes it interesting. Otherwise, we could just use the pruning chain rule from Bitcoin. And then lastly, we'd like to have the support property. K support here means that if we finalize a block, then at least K honest parties thought that this was actually a block on their best chain. This is a nice property because it prevents dishonest parties from just finalizing an arbitrary block in the tree. It means that if you finalize a block, it had a certain amount of support among honest parties. And yep, so that brings me to our protocol. In our paper, we have the Algorand protocol. Algorand in Danish means determined, so final. Yeah. And here is it in a nutshell. So it works on top of any, well, reasonable Nakamoto style blockchain. Reasonable means you have the usual properties like common prefix, chain growth, chain quality. It's a black box protocol. That is, you don't need any fancy things to know about how your blockchain works. The only thing, of course, we have to update is the best chain rule. So all you do in the best chain rule is say you prefer chains with finalized blocks over those with less finalized blocks. And that's about it. You can run the protocol with a committee. The way you select the committee doesn't really matter. I mean, as Jesper mentioned in his talk about, in his topic, right, this is this role selection. And so this is independent of the actual protocol. You can have a committee selected by stake. You could have a static committee. You can have a permission committee, whatever you like. In the paper, we describe some option you have there. Now, if you want to know more about that, feel free to watch the video on the SCN webpage or just go to ePrint and look at the paper. Yep, that's it from my side. Are there questions?
Thanks, Daniel.
I have a quick question.
Yes.
Thank you for the talk, Daniel. You mentioned NSC blockchain. What does NSC stand for?
Yeah, that's I mean that's an abbreviation for Nakamoto style consensus.
I see. So your finality layer works for proof of work types of
yes.
things.
I mean we in the paper we look at those. I mean, in principle, you could of course put it also on a BFT style blockchain, but there you already have this idea of just a block is final once it's produced, right? There you could use such a finality layer as an additional security. For instance, say you run a localized BFT in your basement among your 3 computers, you could still use such a layer on a public blockchain to get better security.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And your techniques probably involved running some sort of BFT permission style consensus. I mean, on top of proof of work consensus.
The whole permissionless is kind of abstracted away by the committee selection. But yes, once we have a committee, the committee essentially does an agreement.
Okay.
So
thank you.
Yeah.
Any other questions? So can you elaborate a little bit on how you select a committee on a permissionless protocol?
I mean, what you could do is you could have similar to how Algorand selects participants for their chain. You have a VRF-based lottery.
Oh, VRF, all right.
And that gives you a place in the committee, right? And you have a proof that you're part of the committee, and then you just send along this proof for the first message. Does that answer your question, or?
Yeah, and I guess your analysis is in the, I forget, this partial synchrony model.
I mean, yes, for the messages, right? We don't need any synchronous assumption in our protocol.
But then in that model, when you do the agreement committee thing, that would not be a majority, right? It would be a 2/3 majority.
Yes. I mean, that's like any BFT style protocol. You can tolerate strictly less than a third corruption, yes. So if you, for instance, would use that on, say, a Bitcoin style, say, Ouroboros Browse, right? Then it could well be that the finality layer breaks before the actual chain breaks, because the chain below could tolerate more corruption.
Right. Okay, thanks, Daniel. More questions at the end, if you have any. Next talk is Tight Verifiable Delay Functions by Nico Dutling, Sanjam Garg, Julio Malavolta, and Prashant Vasudevan. And Julio is going to begin in the talk.
Hey, I hope you can hear me well. I'm going to share my screen now. Let me know if
you sound a little low.
Low, okay, better?
Oh, that's better, yeah.
Okay, fantastic. I hope you can see my screen without problems.
Yeah.
Cool. Okay, so yeah, thanks for the introduction. So I'm going to talk about tight verifiable delay functions. This is a joint work with Nico, Sanjam, and Prashant. So let me start with a little bit of introduction about verifiable delay function. What is a verifiable delay function? It is a concept that was recently introduced by Bonnet et al. In Crypto 2018, and it is a function f such that satisfies the property of sequentiality and verifiability. And by sequentiality, I mean that it takes some time t in order to evaluate f on a uniformly chosen input x, where t is a time parameter, and anyone can verify that pair xy is indeed a valid input-output pair, that is f of x equal y, in time much less than t. Which in particular means that it is much easier to verify a function rather than recomputing it from scratch. And this is a primitive that has many applications, and it has recently attracted a lot of interest in both the research and the industrial community. And there has been significant interest, for example, by Ethereum to implement constructions of this sort. And so let me tell you a little bit more formally how we define a verifiable delay function. So it consists of three algorithms. The setup algorithms takes input the security parameter and returns the public parameter of the function. Once you have the public parameters, then you can evaluate the function on an instance x and a time parameter t and return the output y, together with a proof pi that certifies that y is indeed the output of the function on input x. And then there exists a public algorithm that takes as input the public parameter, the input x, the output y, the proof t and the proof pi and the time parameter t, and returns 0 or 1, meaning that it is convinced or not that f of x equal y. So this is very simple, and let's check what are the properties that we require from these algorithms. In particular, what is the runtime of the algorithm? So we want that the setup algorithm should run in time polynomially lambda, and in particular independent from t. Whereas the evaluation algorithm is allowed to run in time c times t for any constant c, and we're going to refine this notion very soon. And the important part is that the runtime of the verification algorithm is polylogarithmic in t. So for a growing t, verifying is much faster than computing the function. And in this paper, we are interested in what we call tight verifiable delay function, which essentially says that the time to evaluate the verifiable delay function is very close to t. In other words, that the constant c that I wrote in my slide is approximately equal 1, or asymptotically equal 1. So let me tell you a little bit about what we knew ahead prior to our work in terms of construction of verifiable delay function. So verifiable delay function can be thought of as a special case of succinct non-interactive arguments. So in particular, we can use succinct non-interactive arguments generically to construct verifiable delay functions. We know these things exist in the random oracle model unconditionally, and gives you essentially optimal proof size, which is a constant amount of bits, ignoring factors in security parameters. And if you use snarks naively, the prover complexity, which is the measure that we are interested in this work, is some constant greater than 1 times t. Therefore, the original work of Bonnet et al. Investigated whether we can actually close this gap and get down to tight prover complexity, and they propose a construction with essentially optimal parameter, but based on incremental verifiable computation, which is sort of a stronger form of succinct non-interactive arguments. And in particular, it requires stronger assumptions, and we have significantly less efficient construction. The only construction that I'm aware is essentially a recursive composition of snarks. So it will be much less easy to implement in practice. It also entails stronger assumptions. Besides the generic construction that we have to construct verifiable delay functions, 2 recent works have shown recently how to construct verifiable delay functions more efficiently without any generic compiler. In particular, the work of Petersak and Wesolowski, they show, assuming that the sequential squaring operation is inherently sequential in hidden order groups, they show the very efficient verifiable delay functions. And the parameter that, as I said before, that we are interested in this work is the prover complexity. And it turns out that for Wesolowski's VDF, he described a tight algorithm to compute the verifiable delay function, whereas Petersak's verifiable delay function, at least in his original paper, required time proportional to square root of t. Plus t, of course, to compute the verifiable delay function. So our question was, can we do better? Is there any reason why these functions don't have a tight prover complexity? And it turns out that by a simple modification, you can actually prove a pretty strong theorem that says that you can generically bootstrap any verifiable delay function that satisfies some mild structural property to satisfy tight security. In particular, we can take a verifiable delay function where the prover runs in time c times t for any constant c, and construct out of this a tight verifiable delay function. Then we ask whether this is somewhat optimal, or can we do better in terms of assumption. And we show that our result is somewhat optimal in the sense that, at least for efficient construction, in the sense that there exists actually no black box construction of a verifiable delay function which is unconditionally secure in the random oracle model, where the prover is essentially tight. And I must say that I should mention that the same, actually a stronger result was recently proved in the concurrent work of Mahmoudi, Smith, and Wu to appear at ICALP 2020. where they prove a stronger negative result about the existence of verifiable delay functions in the random oracle model. Yeah, I would like to conclude my talk with a few open problems, which I think are very interesting, and we currently have no essentially very little idea on how to do them. For example, I think the main open problem in the area is to construct efficient post-quantum verifiable delay functions. So the current construction of Peterzak and Wesolowski requires unknown order groups, and in particular discrete logarithm based hard problems or factoring related hard problems, which we all know they are completely insecure given a universal quantum computer. The other question that I think is very interesting, and there is actually some recent progress at Crypto this year, is whether we can construct verifiable delay function without assuming random oracle that is in the standard model. And I think the way this is done currently is by showing a sound instantiation of the Fiat-Shamir transformation, and unfortunately the underlying assumptions are pretty strong, and the resulting construction is rather inefficient. It's more of a feasibility result. So can we improve that, and can we design efficient verifiable delay function in the standard model such that their efficiency matches somehow the construction in the random oracle model? Okay, so that being said, I'm happy to take questions, and thanks for your attention.
Thanks, Julia. Any questions for Julia?
I don't know how to read the chat, so maybe you tell me. Could you tell me, please, if there is some questions?
At the bottom, you should have a chat.
Let me stop there.
Right now, it seems like there's no question in the chat.
Okay.
I have a question regarding formalizing the security of the delayedness property. Mm-hmm. So intuitively, it seems like you don't want adversaries to exist that can compute the function faster than t steps.
That's correct.
Right?
Yes.
And how do you formalize that? Are these adversaries polynomial time machines, or do they run slower than polynomial time? Do they run polynomial time in t, or?
Right. So I mean, so there are I think there are two separate questions here. So the first question is like, how do you formalize, and the second question is, what's the exact security notion that we want? So it turns out that, so let me answer the second first, and then I tell you what I mean. It's not something we did, but like how Bonnet al formalize this primitive. So first it turns out that for verifiable delay function, it's not sufficient to say that the adversary should not be able to compute the output of the verifiable delay function in time less than t, but in particular, we need to say that to the eyes of the adversary, which runs in time less than t, the output on a uniformly chosen input x is uniformly at random. So this is sort of the difference between a search and a decision problem. So, and we need the stronger version for many applications of the DS. So we need a decision version. And the way this is captured formally, which is the first part of the answer, is that I think, to the best of my knowledge, the way this is done is by considering the adversary as a circuit, and by saying that the depth of the circuit is at most t. So like it doesn't have enough, like logical gates to compute the functions in time t.
I see. And do you get a contradiction to some well-known security assumption that no such circuits can be built?
Right. So the assumption that we get a contradiction for is the sequential squaring, is that in order to form t many squarings, the best runtime of the algorithm is somewhat close to t steps, t sequential steps. Thanks for the question.
I guess an alternative formulation to the circuit formulation is, fix a computational model and you measure concrete steps of the parties as opposed to arbitrary polynomial time. So you have this type of assumptions, like what you just said. as long as the other side takes less than t steps, then the thing is secure. Takes t+1, and it's not.
Yeah, I guess that's probably a better way if you want to measure, like the concrete parameters of the construction. We did like sort of the lazy way.
Yeah.
Like,
so probably there is. I like to hear a high-level description of the. I guess you take any VDF constructions and you improve it, right? So the highlight of that construction, of that approach.
Sorry, could you repeat the question?
I'm saying you had a generic way of you taking a VDF construction that takes c times t, right? And you improve it.
Oh, yeah. Good, fantastic. So
how long would it take you to explain because otherwise we can do it at the end.
Oh, yeah, actually I have a few slides, for that. It's actually very simple, the compiler. Do you have
I think we have time, so go ahead.
So, yeah, let me just do that. So I'm going to share my screen. It'll be fast.
Clement is asking me to show myself on the chat.
So first of all, yeah, so the property that we assume from the verifiable delay function is what we call self-composability, which essentially says, sorry, the first thing that we say is that the evaluation algorithm is split in two different subroutines, one that compute actually the function of the output and the other that proves that the function is actually well computed. So we split into compute and prove. You can always do that. And now we say that, the property that we want is that the computation algorithm on time t0 plus t1 gives you the same output that the computation algorithm recursively applied first over time t0, then take the output of this thing and feed it again into the computation algorithm where time t1. So essentially this means that if you start running the computation algorithm, stop in the middle, and then feed it into another instance of the computation algorithm, you would get the same result as if you just compute the computation algorithm straight line. So this is clearly true for sequential squaring, and it's true for all VDFs that we know, but there might be VDFs for which this doesn't hold, so this is the condition that we need. And now once you have that, so let's look at the simple example where the proof time takes twice as long as t. So and the computation time is exactly t. Well, now the idea is very simple. So we take the input x, we start running the computation algorithm for just enough time such that the proof algorithm would terminate at time t. And this in particular means that at time t/2, our computation algorithm will stop. And we somehow prove that the computation done until that point was correctly computed. Now, at this point, we branch the execution in two different subroutines, and that again compute the same compute function, and again for the time such that it would take for the proving algorithm to terminate exactly at time t, and again we'll stop at let's say 3/4 of t. Now we keep going this way until we are left with a constant amount of steps. And since there are a constant amount of steps, we don't need to actually produce a proof for that. We can just let the verifier recompute this constant amount of steps. Whereas it's not hard to see actually that all the proofs will terminate at time exactly t. So at that point we are done. So this requires a bit more parallelism from the prover, but it's very easy to show that you require at most log times t or polylog many processors in order to compute that. And well, the proof just consists of the intermediate proofs together with the intermediate output of the computation. And again, this is just a logarithmic overhead in the size of the proof. So that's the basic idea of the compiler. And it's very generic, so you can take any of the construction that I mentioned in the beginning and lift it to the type prover settings.
So I guess this way you can also do a fair two-party computation in some sense.
So I'm not sure what you mean by like there are by fairness, but
what we call resource fairness. That
So that's more of a property of the verifiable delay function, right?
But this partitioning the interval in half every time, and so both parties take turns doing this, and they approach to the final.
Yeah, it's very related, yes.
All right, great. Thanks, Julia.
Thanks
Next
for the questions.
Next talk is Anonymity and Rewards in Peer Rating Systems by Lydia Garnes, Xiaoling Gun, Elizabeth Quaglia, and Julia Traverso. And Lydia is going to be giving the talk.
Hi, I'll just share my screen.
With your screen.
Is that okay? Can you see?
Yeah, you're good.
Great, thanks. Hi, so I'm going to go over our paper, Anonymity and Rewards in Peer Rating Systems, and this is joint work with Elizabeth Quaglia, Xiaolin Ng, and Julia Traverso. So a rating or reputation system assigns a user a reputation value based on feedback from other users. And this reputation value can be seen as a metric of trustworthiness or merit, or some kind of reliability. So anonymity can be important in providing feedback because it reduces the fear of repercussions when giving honest feedback. However, it can also allow for misbehavior, such as bad-mouthing or even abusive feedback. An existing work addresses this through tracing. So essentially, the malicious user's anonymity can be revoked, and then they can be punished. So in this work, we take a different approach and instead reward users who rate honestly, and this allows us to still preserve the anonymity of ratings, even with respect to the reputation server. So one obstacle is accurate ratings must be incentivized without being de-anonymized. And the solution that we use is to incentivize all users responsible for a large set of ratings simultaneously. However, unfortunately, this still reduces the anonymity set of ratings. So now a rating that's rewarded is can only be authored by a user who has also been rewarded. And this is particularly the case given the feedback is weighted by reputation. However, both cases restricting access to users' reputation helps potentially be by a reputation holder. And we can also introduce another central entity called the rewarder who chooses which rating should be rewarded. And now no entity can compare both the ratings rewarded and the users rewarded. So here's roughly how the ratings work. So for each rating, the user rates other users and stores a trapdoor. And also this is bound to a reputation and sends this to the rewarder. The rewarder checks this and can calculate R' for each user, which can be sent to the reputation holder. So then the rewarder chooses the accurate ratings and outputs K1 incentives, which are broadcast. The user then uses their trapdoor and the incentives to output an incentive claim. And these incentive claims are sent to the reputation holder authenticated, and the reputation holder can then use R' and R'' to update the reputation of the user. So in terms of security, ratings should not be able to be de-anonymized or linked by the reputation holder. And under full corruption, the adversary should learn no more than that a user that has been rewarded n times per round is responsible for n of the rewarded ratings. We also need to ensure that multiple feedback cannot be given on the same user per round. The users cannot lie about their reputation. Users cannot frame others, and that users cannot claim incentives that they did not actually get awarded. So the building blocks we use are linkable ring signatures and direct anonymous attestation. And both of these allow a member of a group to sign on behalf of that group without revealing their identity within this group. In linkable ring signatures, users generate their own secret and public key, whereas in DAA, this is done via an interactive protocol with the issuer. For linkable ring signatures, all signatures with the same signer can be linked, whereas in DAA, we have user-controlled linkability, So signatures with the same base name and signer can be linked. So we modified DAA to bind it to some kind of reputation value to allow feedback to be weighted by reputation. And roughly our construction looks like this. So for each rating, a new signing and verification key for a linkable ring signature scheme is generated. The signing key is saved as the trapdoor, and the verification key is encrypted under the rewarder public key and included in the rating. Also, a DAA star signature is included on the feedback. The rewarder then decrypts the verification keys and uses these as the incentives. And to claim an incentive, a user simply signs a linkable ring signature using the trapdoor, which is a signing key, and using the incentives as their set of verification keys. So security, traceability is given by our user-controlled linkability. Enforceability of reputation is given by the fact our modification to DAA star, which ensures that reputation is bound to signatures. The non-frameability of linkable ring signatures and DAA star ensures non-frameability. And fair rewards is due to the fact that if a user uses the same trapdoor twice, this can be detected due to the linkability of linkable ring signatures. So anonymity is given because incentive claims cannot be linked to ratings because the verification key is encrypted, and then the anonymity of DAA star then ensures anonymity. And under full corruption, the incentive claims can't be linked to ratings because of the anonymity of linkable ring signatures. So I've introduced an anonymous peer rating system, which allows accurate ratings to be incentivized while they remain anonymous, provided a formal security model, and given an efficient construction provably secure in this model. So thank you very much for listening. Let me know if you have any questions.
Thanks, Lydia. Any questions? Quick question. What's the full corruption model again?
So essentially, we have two central entities, the reputation holder and the rewarder. And when both of them collude, because they know which users are being rewarded and which ratings are being rewarded, we can't achieve complete anonymity because they can compare these two and use this to partially de-anonymize or reduce at least narrow it down to a smaller set of users. So we essentially say that for each user that has been rewarded n times, we should only know that they potentially could have authored. For each rating that has been rewarded, we should only know that they're one of the users that were rewarded, essentially.
All right, thanks.
Thanks very much.
Okay, if there are no more questions, thanks, Lydia. We're going to move to the next talk, which is secure generalized deduplication via multi-key revealing encryption by Daniel Lucani, Lars Nielsen, Claudio Orlandi, Elena Pagnin. Did I say that right? And Rasmus Vestergaard. And Elena's going to be giving the talk. And you are muted.
The muting is easy to fix, but getting the right desktop could be a bit tricky. So I want to share that desktop. Okay. Do you see the slides or do you see the notes and everything else?
We see the slides.
Perfect. Okay. Well, first of all, I would like to thank the organizer of SCN for putting up this platform and making the conference happening despite this pandemic. And then thank the virtual audience for being here at whatever time of the days it is for all of you. So let me move on to the talk. I will talk about my work on secure generalized deduplication by multi-key revealing encryption. This was done in collaboration with Daniel, Lars, Claudio, and Rasmus, who sit in Aarhus University at the moment. Okay, so let me start with a summary of our contribution. We provided a definitional framework for multi-key revealing encryption. We present a generic construction of this primitive from message locked encryption, deterministic encryption, and randomized encryption. And we also show how to instantiate our compiler in the random oracle model using Sol8 hash function. And finally, we provide a proof of concept implementation on our multi-key revealing encryption scheme for a specific revealing function, which is useful to perform generalized duplication of source data. And that's our application scenario. So in my longer video, I actually talk more on the motivation of this work and the construction and the results of implementation. And now we'll focus more on the technical details and how we model this primitive. So multi-key revealing encryption, as the name suggests, this is a generalization to the multi-user setting of revealing encryption. So we have a setup algorithm that produces some global public parameters. And these public parameters include a revealing function that takes as input and plaintext and outputs a value v. In the case for generalized duplication, it takes as input 2 messages and say, are these deduplicatable or not, according to the deduplication function one considers. So then there is a key generation algorithm that outputs the secret key of each user. This can be run independently by every user. Of course, we have encryption and decryption, which works with the usual syntax and correctness. The interesting thing is actually the last algorithm, which is the reveal function. So this one takes as input n ciphertexts and outputs 1 value. And for correctness, we actually wish that this value is the same as what will be computed on the plaintext data that are behind this ciphertext. So it somehow resembles functional encryption. Indeed, if we try to compare our construction with the functional encryption, instead, we get that our construction doesn't need to have a per user slot or labels as it happens for multi-client functional encryption. So it's somehow more flexible, and it's actually instantiatable from hash function only, as we show in the paper. Regarding the security model, we follow the classical framework of revealing encryption, which is we use a simulated-based security model where the adversary is asked to distinguish whether she's interacting with the real world, so the concrete instantiation of the multi-key revealing encryption scheme, or with an ideal world, well, all the algorithms simulated. So the security notion then is defined with respect to a leakage function, which precisely quantified the information leakage of the multi-key revealing encryption scheme. This means that for every scheme, we will define this leakage function L that takes as input an arbitrarily polynomially many number of plaintext and returns the values conveying basically any information that could be publicly computed given access to the ciphertext corresponding to the input plaintext. So the leakage essentially is modeling what the adversary can infer from her queries and the ciphertext she sees. Now, optimal leakage, of course, is when the scheme is leaking exactly the functionality that is supposed to compute. However, in classical constructions, there is some more leakage, but our construction, we can actually prove it that has optimal leakage. So we're just leaking the duplication functionality that we wanted to implement. Let me tell you a little bit some rationale on how we do it by exploiting random oracles. So in our security model, as we said, we have the real and ideal world, and let's consider an attack scenario that is basically motivating why having random oracle is not necessarily evil when designing multi-key revealing encryption. So if the adversary in this attack scenario, the adversary is performing a number of encryption queries for a target user, let's say ID star in this case, and then afterwards she decides to corrupt this user and get a secret key. So in the real world, there is no problem because the secret key of the user is actually created at the beginning of time, so every ciphertext is encrypted with this key. However, when we are in the ideal world, this trick works, so the adversary can re-encrypt the messages, see that the ciphertexts are correct, and check everything. But on the ideal world, the simulator needs to come up with a key that explains all of the ciphertext, all of the plaintext without knowing the plaintext. So during the encryption query, the simulator solely has access to the leakage function I was talking before, and not the messages. So it will only learn the messages during the corruption query, and that's somehow too late to then find the one single key that explains them all, unless we allow for a key that is as long as the number of messages we get. So basically in the standard model, there is no way to get a construction multi-key revealing encryption that tolerates user corruption and has a fixed key size. This is due to the uncompressibility of random data. Instead, what we can do is to use the random oracle model, where we can keep track of the adversary attempt to querying function. And every time he's trying to encrypt something, he needs to interact with the random oracle. And every time he interacts with the random oracle, we let the simulator make a guess on what is the actual message that the adversary is trying to encrypt. And then we can add this to the pool of the messages that will provide a leakage function. So we believe that this is a more fair way to define security, because now the simulator gets to guess at least what was the original message, instead of dealing with the Bellares et al. Kind of definition for message lot encryption that are connected to a random distribution on the messages, instead of actually implemented what we consider to be the intuitive security notion for deterministic encryption, which is the fact that a ciphertext C discloses no information about the plain text it encloses unless the adversary has already seen C. So in the standard model, since the adversary can locally encrypt without interacting with the oracles, we cannot keep track of what ciphertext has already produced and what ciphertext it can actually use in order to distinguish between the real and the ideal world. Okay, so I hope this gives some more information on our work. Of course, you find the link to the full talk, to the slides, to the paper on the webpage, but also on ePrint there is a full version.
Thanks, Olivia.
Yeah.
Any questions?
I had a question about the third slide with the model.
This one?
Yes, the third, the previous one.
Yeah. Okay, yes.
So is the function f here not given as a parameter to set up? Does
no,
this work?
So, well, it's not that there is a multi-key revealing encryption scheme that can implement a lot of functions, but somehow for every function you create a scheme. That's the same as what happens with the revealing function. So you have revealing encryption, you have order revealing encryption. You know, you decide what is the functionality you want to implement, and then you build the scheme on top.
So you're saying your scheme is for a specific function f that does the duplication?
Exactly. Yeah, we just wanted to basically test what is the additional cost of having some privacy on top of the duplication. We found out that it's you know, a cost that you can very easily pay, because of course there's going to be some overhead. We are encrypting data, so we want to represent basically more data, but we can still deduplicate thanks to this revealing function, and thanks to the multi-key probability property, we can also duplicate across different users, which means we can still compress the data on the cloud and add a layer of protection, so privacy on the client's data.
Thank you.
Yeah. Now, if I find the Zoom, I can also stop sharing my screen. But...
All right, thanks.
So, can I get...
move on to the next talk, which is aggregatable subvector commitments for stateless cryptocurrencies by Alin Tomescu, Ita Abraham, Vitalik Buterin, Justin Drake, Dan Feist, and Dmitry Kobratovich. And Alan's going to be giving the talk. Is Alin or Ailing or Alin? How do you pronounce your name?
Yes, Alin. Hi. Hi, Juan.
Right, welcome.
Let me try and share my screen. Oh, okay. Can everybody see?
Yeah.
Perfect. All right, cool. Thanks so much for having me and for organizing the conference. So I want to tell you quickly about our work on aggregatable subvector commitments for stateless cryptocurrencies. This is work with Itai Avram, my collaborator at VMware Research, and the Ethereum Foundation team, Vitalik, Justin, Dankrad, and Dimitri. So the motivation for our work is, if you are aware of how existing cryptocurrencies work, they have these miners that rely on state stored on disk to validate transactions and blocks. So for example, in an account-based cryptocurrency like Ethereum, each miner stores a state, here represented as a vector that maps a user I to their public key, PKI, and their balance. And the state is stored on disk. And when the miner sees a transaction, let's say from user 1 sending $5 to user 2, what the miner does is it checks that user 1 has enough balance in this database. And then if so, he alters the database state to reflect the change in balance. And this validation state can be quite large. So for example, if you account for smart contracts in Ethereum, you're talking about hundreds of gigabytes. And in cryptocurrencies like Bitcoin without smart contracts, it's gigabytes in size. And as a result, it poses some scalability challenges. So for example, if you want to do consensus via sharding, in these sharded consensus algorithms, miners often have to switch shards. And when they do, they have to download the state from the shard they just switched to. And the larger the state, the slower the consensus. And the slower the consensus, the less adaptive security you get. So this is something that people want to speed up. Another problem is that if you're a new node entering the system, you kind of have to download this full state in order to meaningfully start validation on the network. And finally, this large state can lead to denial of service attacks because the state is stored on disk. And if you have uncareful implementations, you might get really, really slow validation, which leads to denial of service. So it would be really nice to sort of figure out a way to reduce the state that miners store because of these scalability challenges. So previous work actually proposed doing this via authenticated data structures. And in particular, they focused on vector commitments. So the work by Cepurnoi, Papamantu, and Zhang was the first to use vector commitments to propose stateless validation. And what they did essentially is they took the state, which is just a vector in an account-based cryptocurrencies, and they committed to it using the vector commitment scheme. And the idea is that once you commit to the state, you get a small succinct digest that is, say, 32 bytes rather than hundreds of gigabytes. And for each position in the vector, you get a proof, pi I, that at position I, you have a balance of $65 and a public key of PKI. And now the miners only store the digest D and the users store their proofs. So user I stores their proof pi I of their balance. And when you have a transaction, you can use the VC verify position API to check that the user has enough balance. So the transaction is augmented here. User 1 is sending $5 to user 2, but user 1 indicates his full balance and gives a proof pi 1 that their balance is $65, which the miner can verify using this API against the digest D. And now what the miner needs to do is he needs to modify the vector, but he only has the digest. So actually he has to update the digest representing the vector. So he uses an update digest API to do this. And now that the digest has changed, the proofs become invalid because the proofs are only valid with respect to digest D. But fortunately, there's another API that allows each users to update their proof by processing transactions that have been sent on the network. So this is kind of the stateless validation framework for account-based cryptocurrencies, given a vector commitment scheme, and it's highly simplified, and there's a lot of subtleties that you can read in our paper, but this is the high-level idea. And what we do essentially is we propose a very efficient vector commitment scheme from KZG polynomial commitments that can be used in this framework. So our scheme has constant sized aggregatable and updatable proofs. So the size is important because the larger the size, the larger the transaction. The aggregation is important because you have many transactions in a block and you want to aggregate all of the proofs into a single one. And the updatability is important because, like I said before, each user has to update their proofs. We also have constant sized update keys. What an update key is some auxiliary static information that the users can use to do this proof update. And you can see more details about this in the paper, but it's very important that this is small since it has to be included in the transaction. And we also have a quasi-linear time algorithm for computing all proofs in the vector commitment using the technique by two of our co-authors. And this proof precomputation is important because typically you don't actually want the users to do the proof update. You want to have some proof serving nodes that constantly compute all proofs and users can go and fetch the proofs from. And in contrast with previous work, we support aggregation. So previous work is either non-aggregatable or has really large update keys, which is problematic because they have to be included in the transactions, or is based on less efficient hidden order groups. And regarding this claim, I should say that we didn't evaluate our scheme. It's just we believe that our scheme will be much faster because it relies on prime order based groups with pairings rather than hidden order groups, which are 10 times larger. Additionally, we give a new security definition for KZG batch proofs, which we proof secure under strong Diffie-Hellman. We show how to derive the public parameters of our VC from classic powers of tau public parameters for snark schemes that are already out there generated for existing systems. This keeps our trusted setup very simple, and it also keeps our public parameters updatable. So you can just, let's say, download the latest public parameters generated by Ethereum, refresh them, and get some public parameters for our VC scheme. And in addition, we go over a lot of the subtleties associated with VC-based stateless cryptocurrencies, which I don't have time to go over in this talk. So one thing you have to do, in addition to keeping track of balance and public keys, is keep track of transaction counters to prevent replay attacks. Also, these update keys that are used to update proofs actually need to be verifiable. And in addition, when you have these vector commitments that are based on prime order groups, they are actually bounded in size, and you can get denial of service attacks where attackers exhaust the size of your vector. So it's important to address that too. And that's basically a quick summary of our work. And if you don't want to read our paper, I do want to refer you to our blog post, which kind of quickly summarizes the VC scheme. And with that, I thank you, and I'm open for questions.
Thanks, Aline. Any questions for him? So subvector in the title refers to?
Yeah, it refers to the fact that our proofs are aggregatable. So if I have k proofs corresponding to k positions or a subvector of the vector, I can take these k proofs and aggregate them into a subvector proof. And this is a notion.
The partial thing, the partial vector, subvector, yeah, right.
Yes, yes. So this was a notion introduced by Lai and Malavolta in Crypto 18, I should say.
All right, thanks.
Thank you.
Any other questions for Aline or the other speakers?
I actually have a quick question for Aline. Hey, so yeah, very nice work. I really like the work. Do you plan to? I don't know how like how you're involved in this you are, but like, do you guys plan to implement this, or like if not, can you tell me what are the barriers that you face, or maybe it's just not worth not worth the effort? Or
yeah, we didn't implement it, but we could have. I'm not sure. It would be interesting to benchmark. There's a lot of vector commitment schemes out there these days. There's stuff from RSA, stuff from KZG, stuff from Diffie-Hellman exponent. I think what's more interesting to implement is the stateless system, but unfortunately the stateless system is a bit complex to implement. You actually have to do the full thing, and you have to take care of a lot of subtleties. So I think that's interesting work on its own. The vector commitment implementation is not difficult. So for example, I think the most difficult part is the proof precomputation, the Feist-Kovratovich technique. I expect that the VCs from Diffie-Hellman exponent and from strong bilinear Diffie-Hellman will be fastest. But again, like when you think about introducing them into a system, that's where a lot of subtleties might kick in, and who knows, maybe you'll find out the RSA stuff is fastest when you actually do the full system.
No, I mean, I'm sure that like the prime order group will be faster, and like you can do also like FFT tricks there, right? I guess that's what you're doing, like some of the stuff. And I was more interested, like whether you guys either implementing the full system or not, and is that something that there's interested in the community or not? Right? But you answered my question.
Yeah. So well, to answer that question, maybe perhaps better. I think the Ethereum folks are very interested in stateless validation. It's what they see as the only hope of scaling Ethereum via sharding. So they're very interested in coming up with authenticated data structures for stateless validation and in implementing them. So I think we'll see implementations soon.
Okay, fantastic. That's what I wanted to hear. Thanks.
All right. Any other questions for anybody? If not, well, thanks to all the speakers we can't clap, but thanks for all the speakers in this session. It was a fun session. And now I'm going to give the floor to the organizers. Thanks, guys.
Thanks, actually. Thanks, Juan, and thank all the speakers for today. Essentially, we are done for today. So we are perfectly on time.
Don't forget to ship the mozzarella. And
of course, send me the address and be sure to be there. Otherwise, the mozzarella will be lost.
The same address you sent the proceedings, like it should come.
Or the pasta, what's the name of the pasta? Help me here.
Okay.
So, the pasta typical from that region.
Okay. It depends. It's a different kind of pasta anyway. Thanks everybody for joining. Thanks the speakers for their talks. Thank Juan for chairing the session. And I can see that the session was done for today. So we'll can stop here and we'll meet again tomorrow at the same time for the second day of the conference. Okay. Thanks everybody. I don't know if Vladimir wants to say something. Vladimir, are you here?
Yeah, now I was muted. No, nothing special to add. It's I'm glad to see that it's working out. People are attending, and the talks are really excellent. So we will see you all tomorrow at the same time.
Okay.
Let me interrupt. So Moti and Carlo Brundo just pointed out what I wanted to know, Scialatelli.
Just saw it. Okay, we'll ship you a couple of boxes of Scialatelli along with the
Yes, that's right. I remember this. This is the Amalfi pasta that you can't get anywhere else.
Okay, great. So we'll see you everybody. We'll talk tomorrow.
All right.
Have a good day.
Bye, guys.
Bye-bye.
Hello, Juan.
Clemente, you're gonna close the session and I don't know, whatever happens with the recording, right?
Yeah, I'm just